Hello, my name is Karen Maness. I'm the Scenic Arts Supervisor of Texas Performing Arts, and I welcome you here for a unique Explore UT experience to come onto Bass Concert Hall stages to see this extraordinary exhibition of motion picture backdrops from Hollywood's golden age. As curator of this exhibition, I've selected backdrops from a variety of genres for you to experience, from as early as 1944 all the way to 1966. The painters who created these backdrops were responsible for iconic films such as The Wizard of Oz and that spectacular fight scene from North by Northwest on the monument of Mount Rushmore. This exhibition offers our audience a chance to really truly see the masterwork of these artists who were never credited for their contributions to the Hollywood motion picture industry until recently. I welcome you today to take a peek into Hollywood motion picture making magic. When you think back to some of your favorite historic films, you may not have ever noticed that these stories have been told through the creations of sets and oftentimes backdrops that were never designed to be seen. They were only delivered to tell the story and to carry you as an audience member. What we're offering right now here for Explore UT, and we're so excited you could join us, is a chance to come backstage, to come behind the scenes, to take a look how these master artists created these monumental illusions that have never publicly been seen before. For the very first time, audiences are invited onto our stage to explore these backdrops. These have never been in the public view. They were always created in secrecy, and UT Austin has the extraordinary opportunity to now have 50 of these iconic historic backdrops as educational assets to train the future generation of artists. These paintings possess everything a scenic artist would need to know about the craft of motion picture scenic art and creating illusion, from atmospheric perspective to linear perspective to understanding the position of the actor in relationship to the camera. Everything is here. And the opportunity that these backdrops give us to unpack this information for our students, to be able to deconstruct it down all the way to the preparation of the fabric, to the drawing, to the preparation of the paint, to the painting, to creating this full illusion and empowering our students with that to carry forward in their career is here. One of the scenic artists who himself had trained on these backdrops said, "Karen, it's all in there. Everything you need to know is in these paintings. Break it down and give it to the next generation."
In almost every feature film of Hollywood's golden age, audiences were convinced that what they were seeing was absolutely real. Whether it was an ancient Egyptian kingdom, the Von Trapp family residence, to the stunning paintings of Mount Rushmore from North by Northwest. Backdrops were created to transport an audience and to convince them that what they were seeing was absolutely real. UT Austin now, miraculously in my eyes, owns 50 backdrops from MGM's historic golden age of film. These backdrops and these artists represent the high renaissance of scenic painting for the motion picture industry, and it is astounding to me as faculty and a researcher and an historian of this work that these paintings are here for us to work from. Painted exclusively for the camera's eye and designed never to be noticed, these massive canvases were hidden in plain sight and painted by artists at the top of their training in complete secrecy. Designed to blend in seamlessly with built environments, these backings would have been seen out of windows, used as set extensions to increase the depth of field of hallways, and as full environmental surrounds on sound stages, like the backdrop we have on display from The Outrage, which is a massive painting of the Sonoran Desert, 30 feet tall by 93 feet wide, weighing over 200 pounds. In 2012, the Art Directors Guild's archive began to chronicle Hollywood's motion picture scenic artists' unsung contributions. Working closely with the Art Directors Guild, I, along with my colleague, Richard Isaacs, co-authored The Art of the Hollywood Backdrop. It's an award-winning volume and the definitive text for the behind-the-scenes history of Hollywood's most closely guarded cinematic secrets. In 2017, the Art Directors Guild's archive conducted the Backdrop Recovery Project. It was launched in partnership with JC Backings. This commitment resulted in rescuing 207 historic backdrops from destruction and created the world's most comprehensive archive of Hollywood scenic art history. The Art Directors Guild donated these historic backdrops to museums, motion picture archives, and academic institutions, including the University of Texas at Austin, through Texas Performing Arts Scenic Studio. Once designated as recoverable assets, many of these backdrops reappeared hundreds of times in subsequent MGM films. But one thing they all shared is their exemplary design, rendering, lighting, and color schemes. This backdrop is from Young Bess, 1953, and we're brought to Westminster Abbey and this extraordinary example of a Gothic cathedral. This is a perfect example of MGM's excellence in illusion and linear perspective, and this perspective mastery was brought to MGM through the skills and talent and knowledge of Ben Carré, who himself had learned this academic style of drawing in linear perspective in Paris as a young man. The early part of his career was as an art director, and the later part of his career he became a scenic artist for MGM, and as soon as he walked through the scenic studio doors, he was essentially lost to history. He was rediscovered after his retirement as one of the pioneers of the film industry, but MGM has much to be grateful for in terms of their success in this mastery of illusion that he helped to create in the scenic studio. It was very much a bookend to his early life experience at 13 when he began studying and training as a scenic artist in Paris, to finishing his career watching worlds rise in real time on grand canvases. This 1953 backdrop from Young Bess is a classic in terms of the MGM style of painting. This beautiful architectural painting of Hampton Court shows the mastery that the scenic artists had in terms of understanding, creating the drawing of that architecture, and how to get those beautiful details up around the windows and the turrets of this Tudor castle. Also, this backdrop has an exceptional example of using colors to establish the background, the midground, and then the foreground. And this was very much part of George Gibson's 1-2-3 style at MGM. George Gibson was the scenic art supervisor at MGM and responsible for the look and the quality control of what was coming out of the studio. And he was part of what made MGM considered as the ivory tower of all motion picture scenic art in Hollywood. The best of the best was at MGM, and he demanded a certain quality of control. One of the artists I'd like to attribute for this work also, as many scenic artists were responsible for these paintings. It was never painted by just one, generally 1, 2, or 3. But I know one of the scenic artists on this project was Harry Tepker. And Harry Tepker was a master of that 1-2-3 style, and also extremely adept at training the younger scenic artists who were coming up to understand what that means. So that 1-2-3 style was about mixing colors, like different palette of colors, the background colors, that really brings in these lighter tones. And this background has been established by bringing the sky colors. So if you're ever trying to paint a landscape and you want something to feel like it's way in the background distance, you pull in the color of the sky and the clouds, and you put that into that color palette for the background. Then, to create this sense of depth and to create this sense of a midground, the audience can see this depth pulling forward because the scenic artists in their 1, 2, 3 step have mixed a midground palette of colors of warm and cool temperatures at a different value structure. And when I say value structure, I mean from light to dark. So the background tends to be the lightest in this case. The midground tends to start getting a little darker, and the areas here in the foreground have the highest contrast. And that's another trick that painters can use to force that illusion of depth. When the contrast is higher between this edge of this roof and the sky, this part of the painting jumps forward in the picture plane, and it helps create that sense of depth. And this is what MGM, they were masters of this, and it's so exciting to share this with you. The exhibit also includes recreations of sections of MGM backdrops painted by UT Austin's Scenic Art students, training in the Texas Performing Arts Studios. The MGM source materials are astounding in scale and technical virtuosity. This collection allows our students to step into Hollywood's golden age and learn directly from the masters of motion picture scenic art. These MGM backdrops hold the key to every discipline required to succeed in the art of scenic painting. Welcome to Texas Performing Arts Scenic Art Studio. Now you are truly behind the scenes and behind Bass Concert Hall. This gorgeous space is the place where we paint all of our backdrops, whether on the floor or vertically over here on the paint frame. Behind me, I have examples of a couple of scenic art projects by 2 undergraduate students. This student, actually, Michaela Kalarick, she is off and hired and working as a professional scenic artist now, which is thrilling. Julio Munoz is still a current student and beloved by all of us, and he works here as one of our carpenters in our scenic art studio, and this was his first ever painting class, and so he's still in process on this painting. But this space is set up specifically for learning scenic art. And so this is an example of a paint elevation, or this is our source material that Julio was working on. So the students would be directed to learn how to mix these colors to match them specifically, dry them, test them. So they're learning color theory, they're learning about drawing, and then once they've gotten their images up onto the surface, they're learning about the art of trompe-l'oeil painting, which is to fool the eye. So these students are learning how to push depth and illusion in their paintings. And the fun part is that this tiny detail is just a small piece of one of our backdrops from MGM. This is from The Law and the Lady, and it's a gorgeous interior theater scene, and it's part of our historic collection. So we're able to take sections of these paintings and recreate them. And in this case, we were able to pull the painting down. We laid it on the ground and were able to open it up. So our students can test the colors they've mixed in reference to this image, but also they had the source to look at. So they could see the ease of the marks that were made by the scenic artists before, these master artists, and to try to replicate them. It's easy to get really labored in a painting, but the true art of scenic art is to be able to work as efficiently as possible. Texas Performing Arts invested in a truss system with 2 chain hoists to easily pull our backdrops in and out of the space for use during scenic art class. They're positioned in a way where we could get behind the backdrops and light them from behind if we need to test what's happening with the translucency on the backdrops and give students the chance to really understand how to create that effect. This backdrop brings us to Rome, and it's selected for excellent drawing and linear perspective. This backdrop glows with detailed marble interiors, decorative furniture, illuminated chandeliers, and windows designed to fill the space with light. Here, we offer a unique opportunity for our audience to walk behind the drop to discover the magic of translucent backdrop painting. Translucent backlighting effects were among the arsenal of tools used by scenic artists to create depth in their illusions. Notice the dark gray painted sections of the backsides of these backdrops. Some areas have little to no paint. This backpainting technique helps specific regions of the scene to fall into shadow, creating time of day changes, architectural enhancements, or a complete transformation. This beautiful painting from 1966 glass bottom boat features a stunning example of translucent backdrop painting. Each street lamp light was individually punched out of the backdrop and backed with China silk to enhance the glowing effect. The color changes in the downtown district of Avalon are achieved by taping tiny colored gels onto the back of the drop to give the art director the ability to quickly transform the look. Scenic artists working on backings for film and television had to master an extensive set of specific skills to this media. In addition to a complete command of drawing, color theory, perspective, and an understanding of how light and shadow function in architecture and nature, the backing artist also needed to understand how to render both of these specifically for the eye of the camera, and MGM was considered the best.
Learning from the MGM backdrops, one of the biggest takeaways I had as a student was to not sweat about the small stuff. You know, you see these big, beautiful paintings up close and you start to notice the little paint drips and some odd shapes. And once you take a step back and look at the whole picture, they just blend right into the background. They completely fade away. Seeing that up close, it really resonated with me, and it's something that I've carried on in my career as a scenic artist.
I was fortunate to be a part of the students who recreated the Sound of Music backdrop with Don McDonald, and this gave me a deep understanding of the historical significance of backdrop painting and its influence in design. My experiences at UT constantly benefit my work as a set designer in every project I embrace, and I would not be the artist I am today without it.
He taught everyone how to make these realistic looking trees, and if you held it in a specific way and dabbed the canvas just a couple of times with those different colors, you get such a crazy, awesome, realistic looking tree just in a minimal amount of work. And that was something that I just thought was so cool to learn from how he used to paint the backdrops in Hollywood.
We're so happy you joined us today for Explore UT to take in these extraordinary backdrops. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, honestly, to have a chance to see these backdrops. So we're delighted you could join us today to take a peek into the history of Hollywood backdrop motion picture industry painting, but also take a peek into the future. Take a peek into what students here at UT can learn and what they can bring forward when they start creating new works and creating the next generation of film and the next generation of art and experiences. No matter where you are in Texas, in your homes with your family, you've had a chance to journey with us to England, to Damascus, to the Sonoran Desert, to the coast of California. We're really happy you're here. I wanted to take a moment also to celebrate beyond painting education here at UT Austin and the College of Fine Arts. This space is acting essentially as a living laboratory. The sound designer for this exhibition is named Melissa Quiles, and she just graduated from UT last year. And the lighting designer who created the spectacular backlight looks and front light looks of all of the backdrops, and the lights cycle. While you're here in the exhibition, you'll be able to see a time of day change, so you could see the backdrops used as dynamically as they can be. This lighting design was done by a third-year graduate student in lighting design. His name is Bill Rios. Thank you for spending your day with us. We hope you've loved this. We hope you come visit us at UT Austin to learn more about our programs, what's possible, how you yourselves could come here and learn in these living laboratories right next to professional faculty and staff. to test your talents and test your skills and learn what you can from these masters. UT Austin is an extraordinary place to have the chance to study right at the sides of working faculty and working staff, professionals, to show you the tools of the trade, to teach you through an apprenticeship style system how to physically make works like this. So you could come here to UT Austin and learn how to do this specifically. And we can deconstruct it step by step, no matter where you are on your journey of education. There's so much available to you here at UT. And we're so happy you joined us today, no matter where you are in Texas. And I hope when you watch the next film on Netflix during this pandemic, with your family, or any of the streaming channels, that you see film with new eyes and you understand, have a better sense at least, what kinds of hidden pictures there are in these films. You watch films with a greater understanding of the legions of artists responsible for making these films, from the camera crews to the sound area, to of course lighting, director of photography, and also all the scenic artists and construction people who work together in concert to make these worlds real. Thank you so much. We're delighted you joined us today at Explore UT. And we are live. Hello. We're so happy to have you join us here today. And actually, I'd love to introduce Dean Iverson first from the University of Texas.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Brent Iverson. I'm a chemistry professor here at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm also the honorary chair of Explore UT. And I have to say, it's an incredible thrill and honor to be here with Karen and Thomas to talk about these amazing backdrops. Certainly, there's no substitute for having everyone visit our amazing campus, okay? And in my opinion, the best campus of any university in the entire country. But like everyone, we had to adapt to what's going on in the world. And so we're here with all of you virtually in Virtual Explore UT. What I'd like you to do is everyone from around the state and actually around the world, because we know people are tuning into us from everywhere, just kind of close your eyes and imagine that you're sitting on a great college university campus. And this is where we are experiencing something that is truly remarkable. So Explore UT had to be virtual, but we are so happy you've joined us. Okay, now let's talk about these incredible backdrops.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So my name is Karen Maness, and I am the Scenic Arts Supervisor here at Texas Performing Arts, and I teach for the College of Fine Arts, for the Department of Theater and Dance, and for the School of Design and Creative Technology. And we're joined here today by my dear friend and wonderful collaborator, Tom Walsh, and he is the head of the Art Directors Guild Archives, and we truly have Tom to thank for the fact that we have these exquisite backdrops here at UT Austin. And so we're just going to have a little conversation about how this wild and crazy adventure began in chronicling the history of backdrop painting for motion pictures. So, Tom, can you give us a little insight from your role at the Art Directors Guild and how this passion project, I think it could be definitely summed up that way, how this passion project of the book and ultimately the recovery project began in 2012. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's complicated, and I won't take us too much into the weeds about it all. I mean, it's been a life's journey. I'm a brat of Hollywood. My father was actually a performer under contract as an actor at MGM in the 40s. So in my household, we grew up with all sorts of lore and legacy, and many conversations about the good old days when he was up at the big studio and all of that. By the time I came of age, the studios were all in decline and essentially shuttering. I remember as a early teen going to what was called the Great Auction. That was like in 1971, I think. And I actually chronicled the decline and fall of Hollywood with that period of time when they sold all the assets that the studio had, and they sold the studio as well. But they started by just dismembering everything, sending things to the dump. Hundreds and hundreds of file cabinets full of stills and photos and history of the studio all went into landfills, and all the props were sold, and a lot of the assets were disposed of. So that was my first, and I went to the auction, so I think I got a couple of pieces of the costume that they were selling on one of the stages. But that was my first introduction to being really on the lot of the studios. They were a magical place growing up because you drive around the outside of them, you see these fences and you see these amazing pieces of architecture poking over, but from the backside. So it was like half deconstructed already. But so I grew up, that was the world I grew up in. And then I went to Hollywood High School, and I don't know how I graduated because it was all about putting on the show. So spent 3 years living in the theater, just putting on the show. And then out of that, I always wanted to design, and I was fortunate. A lot of the teachers at our schools, and the public schools were really good then, worked in the studios or had worked in the studios. My first stagecraft teacher in junior high school was also a prop maker at Warner Brothers in the summertime when he wasn't teaching. So, and the same thing with the drama department. And those teachers, they were all veterans of the entertainment industry of some sort. So we had really strong influences. And so I attribute anything that I've done right in my life through the educators that inspired me at various points in time. And that's a debt that never can be repaid. But so out of high school, I was accepted actually into Cal Arts in their first year when they opened up the new campus in Valencia. But as the Irish used to say, it was the time of the Troubles, and arts in general were rather radical at that point in time, and Walt was dead, and they didn't know what to do with this art school with all these radical art expressionist and conceptual artists. So they were trying to get rid of the school and close it down because of some problems they were having. And so they closed my program before I was able to go into it. So instead of going to another college, because we didn't send out, at that time, you didn't send out postcards to 40 different colleges to be considered. You chose one and you said, I'd like to go there, and you might get accepted, you might not. So instead of going to looking for another school, I just started working in the trades and as they call the day players or the overhires. We weren't card members of the union, but they would hire you because there was always a need for additional labor. So I started as a stagehand in Los Angeles, building sets at the various studios and TV. And then did that for several years. And then I finally, because I was still always designing the show somewhere in some small theater or at some school. So I ended up getting, moving over from construction to paint, because that was where I needed to be anyway. It was my birth. We're talking about like 18, 19 years old. I started working at the Center Theater Group in their shop and as a painter. And all the studios, all the painters at that time had all come up through the Hollywood film crucible. They were all well-trained scenic artists, but with Hollywood in decline, they were trying to find work wherever they could. So I was bouncing between the Center Theater Group and another place called, it was an amazing place called Triangle Scenic Studios, and it was in East Hollywood. It was an old building, sort of silent building that Max Sennett had built for his mistress at the time, Mabel Normand, who was one of the stars. And it was a strange building. It was actually triangular as well. And they used to do Westerns and stuff out of there. And the basement is where the electrics department was. And on the first floor, they used to paint all the backdrops for the Civic Light Opera. So we would, my first job there was training, being the pot boy. I mixed all the color and I cleaned all the brushes and the buckets and and chase the pigeons out because it was pretty like a sieve, that place, really. But the painters were all ex-MGM and studio painters on it. Some of the really amazing ones. And they were a real honorary group. You can read this story. It's actually the introduction of the book, because I sort of relive a day in my life training under these people. Training. You didn't train. You just took orders and learned by osmosis. So I'd mix the color, and all the colors then, they were still, and as was all the MGM backdrops that we have, the majority of them were done with dry color pigment. It was just minerals, a lot of them very toxic. I'm surprised I'm still walking around, because we used to use even asbestos as a thickener to create stucco. And it's a great, great material, but it's not good. But the dry colors, they used to use natural binders, animal glues and such as the binder pigment. And then they went to synthetics after that, a thing called Scenic. It was just a transparent, milky white material that you could suspend the color in. But the color was all these beautiful minerals of reds and phthalo blues and greens and yellows, everything highly toxic. And I had this huge rack with all these giant big metal drums and these just big flour scoops. And you would just scoop the different colors, and you had a big mixing thing spinning around, and you dump the color in and get the colors right, and or not right, and have to go back and keep working at it. And then my job was like to stretch. They'd put up the backdrops, and an average backdrop would be about 25 to 30 feet tall, and it could be 80 feet wide, and we would be the ones to size it, putting on just starch. Especially if there's going to be a transparent one, we'd use starch to starch it, and it gets a little bit of a crystalline in the fiber of the cloth. And then you would just start laying it in, and then these guys would take over, and they would do all the drawing and chalk it out with snap lines and charcoal, and then start painting away. And they had these big rolling palettes that you put all the paint on, and they were a little mischievous sometimes, especially if it was another painter. They were all the best. Each one was the best. So there was a lot of rivalry always on the paint floor. And they liked to play strange little tricks with one another, because these paints, because they were organic, over time, not too much time, we used to put like dish soap into them just to keep them getting too raw and stinky. But, when you're working around for a while, you don't notice it. So they used to put like their old buckets underneath the guy they didn't like, and over time it would get really rank over there, and finally they would figure it out. And if they didn't like you, or if you were a young kid like me, they would each eat Limburger cheese between you and try and talk across you while you're all working on the paint frame. Funny group, and they had all their demons, a lot of demons, but that was the world I came into. So, and then fortunately for me, because I had other aspirations, I moved on into fully designing, and then going back to college and all those kind of things. But my origins as a scenic artist was as a child, young adult coming into it. So it always left an impression that never left, even as I went on in career and then ultimately got involved with the Art Directors Guild, and in a political side, I served as president for 11 years. I'll never get those years back, but at least I've got the warden let me out. But I was able to do some good things. And the good things that we did in particular was to form the archives, because we had so many assets from 80 years of filmmaking within the Guild that were just lying fallow, and we didn't want to lose them. So we formed a proper archive and hired an archivist, professional archivist. And through them, we were able to start to bring order to our Gordian knot. And so, jumping ahead, unfortunately, with the decline of the studio system, all of those assets, these backdrops, scenery pieces, went into decline and were lost. But there was one company, which, and now we'll get into our story where we met. It was called JC Backings. And there was a couple other companies that used to rent backdrops to television predominantly, or do custom painting for features. That was kind of the way it worked, because features had more money, so they could order more complicated number of backdrops. At the same time, this period, I'm talking about 70s, 80s, photography, large format photography started to become more financially viable, and it became the alternative to the painted backdrop. So a lot of these senior artists went into retirement kind of very bitter because they felt that they had created an enormous art form, but they were completely eclipsed. It's like John Henry and the steam engine. They are eclipsed and kind of sidelined. So there was a few hanger-oners, and there was J.C. Backings, one of the companies that specialized in painting backdrops. What gave them the market edge over anyone else is the fact that they took up their residence. I mean, their founders were all huge. When you read the book, you get their stories. Huge pioneers and participants in the film industry as painters. But they originally were at different studios. It was a very migratory business. But they ended up at Fox, and then they went into private business with each other. In this case, the family, Coakley family, formed J.C. Backings, and they ultimately rented the old Scenic studio space at MGM. Now, this is important because the MGM studio was the best of everything in all ways. They used to spend money on the infrastructure for making movies. They didn't just pocket it. They really took pride in the product they were producing. And, Louis B. Mayer's great quote is, you do your job well and you have a job for life. Well, that's not true. But, that was what he believed, and everyone working for him believed that. And so that was an important thing. Anyway, in the late 30s, because backdrops, the studios didn't like going on location because the artists got out of control. They couldn't control the artists when they weren't on the lot. The other thing is the equipment was so big and heavy and cumbersome, especially lighting, that it was truly an expedition to go on location. So they built these marvelous studios with the great backlots so they could do everything and control everything. And the need for backdrops just continued to increase. And so the head of the art department at MGM was Cedric Gibbons, and he is really one of the true pioneers, and he's kind of the great industrialist of motion picture manufacture. I mean, all roads lead back to him and his department at MGM in terms of setting the bar and breaking the ground in better ways, smarter ways, grander ways to make motion pictures on that industrial scale. So amongst those things was, how do we do backdrops bigger, faster, cheaper? Not so cheaper, but faster and in a more controlled environment. Because the tradition up to that time was they would just go on the stages that weren't being shot on, and they'd wrap them with cloth and just paint on the stages off of scaffolds and ladders. And that was not a very smart way to go.
It wasn't efficient or safe whatsoever.
Not efficient, not safe, and especially if you were drinking on the job. They lost a few souls that way too. There's that whole thing about the Scenic Arts where you keep his flask inside the Hudson sprayer and you take it up on the upper scaffold, and he'd come down drunk every day, and his friends didn't know how he was doing it until they checked his tank. But anyway, so MGM had a very, very brilliant engineer architect on their staff who was really in charge of designing all the sound stages and all the infrastructure of the studio. So Cedric tasked him with working with George Gibson, the head of the Scenic department, to come up with a studio space, a working space where they could produce, photorealistic paintings on an industrial scale in real time. And so they designed a purpose-built building, which is still there. It's the only one of its kind in the world. And it's, Karen, it's 5 stories high?
I think so. And it has the capacity to have 4 100-foot-long paint frames that are 30 feet tall that could move up and down by the push of a button. So there could be 400 feet of painting being created at once with large natural light windows, so they're all working in a stable lighting setting, and it's extraordinary, and it's still, it's still today, all these years later, one of the finest scenic art studio spaces in existence.
Well, the way it was organized is on the first 3 floors were just airspace below the paint deck, which was on the 4th and 5th floor, and in the first 3 floors that is where the paint frames would go through the floor and be stored and then go back up. but there was all this room for racks. So what they did is they built all these vertical racks in the below this paint deck to store all these backdrops. So over time, they had ended up with thousands of backdrops of all sizes and descriptions, and they kept black and white, beautiful black and white still photographs of all the backdrops in notebooks up in the art department, with their own codes and numbers, so they could tell what film that backdrop was created for, what its dimensions were. They would archive all the artworks, working artworks that were required, and the paint sketches that were required for that. So if they ever had to be reused again or repaired, they had all the documentation. And then on the top two floors was this, as you were saying, that wonderful, wonderful space where the birds would fly in and out, and they had north and south viewing windows. Mm-hmm. And, you're very close to Santa Monica, so there was always a bit of a marine layer and air in there, a little bit of salt. But those backdrops, like that environment, it was very stable, it was reasonably dry, and they just sort of sat there on those frames for all those years. And then when now JC Backings, with the studio in decline, comes into this it's not a vacant space, it's a functioning building, but everybody went home and never came back. And it had all the backdrops still in storage from the history of MGM that hadn't been disposed of.
Because they weren't seen during the big 1970 disposal of all the assets. They were the
great scene unseen.
Great scene unseen. They're hanging up on racks, very much like actually.
So those
racks on the walls that we've built here in the shop. We tried to create a racking system similar to what was at MGM.
Yeah.
And we created that here.
Yeah, so just sort of multiply that by about 500, you know what the inside of that building looked like.
Right.
But they, when they took over the license to use that building for their own purposes, they also bought from the studio for nothing really, all of its content. So they took over control of all those backdrops, and they would rent them, and they put them in their own catalog. They would rent them out to film and television over the next 30 years. Something like that. And over time, they would dispose of things that never rented. And so there were a lot of hidden treasures in there that they didn't know they even had. So that's just to set you up to when we first met.
Right. So in 2012, Tom connected with me and then my co-author on the Art of the Hollywood backdrop book, Richard Isaacs, to begin chronicling the contributions of scenic artists for the Hollywood motion picture industry while we still had time, while we still had a chance.
When did we first meet? Was it at Showcase, or was it?
We met at USITT, I think in 2011, when I was the head of the Scenic Design Commission. And you were a guest panelist, and I knew we'd be coming into the Los Angeles area. And my training is as a scenic artist. I grew up in Southern California, also in San Diego, and I began apprenticing as a scenic artist when I was 13, 14. My mother was a stage manager, and I had started art school. If you want to see your parent and they're in the theater, you go with them. So I was studying at a young age studio art, and I fell in love with the monumental aspect of scenic art. It was, I didn't know I was heading towards the theater to truly be a scenic artist, but my love for the LA freeway murals, I wanted to paint as big as possible. And when I first discovered there was something like a vertical paint frame, kind of like what's behind me, actually behind these backdrops, there's a vertical stationary paint frame. And I realized, oh my gosh, are you serious? I could paint paintings that big. I have to do this. And so, completely obsessed, in love with this kind of painting. And so in 2012, I was planning on programming for this National Theater Conference, and we were going to Los Angeles, and I saw what was being offered, and I was going back to my home, and I wanted to celebrate the scenic artists who were there. I wanted to celebrate the mastery of painting that I knew was there for the people who taught me in theater, but also the people who were working in themed attraction, who were working in opera and film and television. So I reached out to Tom, and I asked if he could connect me with somebody from motion picture and somebody from television. So I put together a panel, not specifically about film at all. It was just about painting and about this cornucopia of talent that was out there to really celebrate that tradition. And so Tom came and he sent a film crew. He sent two master painters, one, Pat DeGreve, who was the head of CBS painting for 30 years, and Michael Dennering, who is a journeyman scenic artist from Warner Brothers. But also Tom said, and these are these incredible assets you should share from the Guild. And so it really opened my eyes. That exhibition and presentation really opened my eyes to just the true wonder of what had been happening in cinematic painting. And I was thrilled. I thought it was over after this session. And Tom approached me and said, we've been looking for somebody to chronicle this work. We think it's you to come over to work with us at the Art Direction.
Something like, you're being very polite, but it was something like that.
It was, and I was delighted to have had the experience of the conference. And then next thing I knew, I was standing in that JC backing space, flown out to California to see what was in that historic MGM space. And I've never seen painting like this. I'd never seen scenic art. And then there's a question here that's popped up in the chat about the difference between painting for theater and painting for film. And what I saw in that,
I can add to that too.
That historic MGM space was a quality of painting. And I'm actually in front of one of our other paintings from the collection. This is actually from the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And I thought, oh, that has to come to Austin. This amazing painting. It's so photorealistic. It's so atmospheric. It has a different role in film than it does on stage. When you go to the theater, you know you're in the theater. You know where you are. We're telling a story, but it can be much more expressionistic. It can be much more colorful. Different changes are happening on stage. We never believe we're actually in Texas and at a farmhouse, right? So there's room for this kind of different artistic expression. But when I walked into this studio, I saw something akin to my training and also my love. I'm an unusual scenic artist. I'm aligned really closely with these scenic artists of this time because I have a strong love of plein air painting and observational painting. And
that's what they all did.
Yeah, they did. And I'm a little unusual for my age because I am very interested in technical mastery of that kind of language of painting. And that's what I found so endearing about these works, but also I was so hungry to learn more. And the paintings that are on our stage are filled. They are now my teachers. And I'm working to bring their knowledge through me to the next generation. That is a big hope. But I have some other questions that just popped up. Okay, question. Incoming freshman student majoring in architecture, but love to work in set and production design. So I was wondering, are there scenic art classes open to all majors? Likewise, what other classes or minors would you recommend? Oh, dear incoming architecture student, come play with us.
More fun than doing all the things you have to do for architecture.
Yeah, I mean, some of the best art directors, production designers have architecture backgrounds. So it's that language of drafting and drawing that you will learn in the architecture school is critical to your success if you're working in film. But also if you come, and yes, people from other majors are welcome to come paint with us. I have a lot of students who come in from film and television. I love architecture students. I love, honestly, anybody who's willing to commit to testing themselves and trusting their taking a risk and trying something and committing to the process and staying committed to this project. So I will throw you deeply into the deep end. I'm sorry, you've got a question, but I won't let you drown, I promise.
Okay, I have a question, and I think I'm asking this on behalf of everybody who's watching who's not ever been exposed to this before.
Yeah.
How in the world can you make a photorealistic 80-foot painting that doesn't take you 3 decades or 4 generations of painters to do? What's your favorite pro tip on how to do this really quick, really well?
A big brush.
Karen, if I can just sort of, different sizes of brushes,
Big
rollers, and
brushes.
sponges. No, back to your point about theater versus film. When I started, there was always this strong rivalry, and uh, especially on the West Coast, where the photorealistic traditions of cinema painting had been born and developed, to the painters on the East Coast who were mostly working in the theater and the opera. And they used to really get at lunchtime, they would really put them down. They don't know anything about paint. They just spread canvas on the floor and they throw stuff down, make watercolors. That's not painting. Because, for, what they were doing, often you were doing for the opera, whatever, you wanted more of a watercolor effect and the traditions. But they were really incredible painters. So it was really just a rivalry. But the tradition truly was, because of real estate, most of the backdrops on the East Coast, even for the cinema, were painted on the floor. And that's more of that's a classic tradition and a European tradition as well. But to be able to do photorealistic with a lot of architecture and perspective required, it's much easier to work on a vertical space. So that's where the Hollywood studio system developed these paint frames that could go up and down by winches and wire cables. So they didn't have to go up and down ladders. They would go up and down quickly, and they could draw them in, and they could lay them in, and they could step back, see where the mistakes were, and improve it and change it and make it happen. And it was really just a simple mechanical thing to make the process of creating this stuff more practical and doable.
And you asked
that's really the difference between the two. And it was just really, again, those small tools that made it more practical for quick turnaround.
Yeah, so we're working with small images that have to blow up really quickly, and like Tom was speaking about, we create a factory, essentially, if you will. Yeah. So in here, I'm standing in this amazing scenery building factory where we have a vertical paint frame. We have the scissor lift where we could go up and down. We have a viewing balcony here. It's incredible. If you guys get a chance to come by Texas Performing Arts and see our facility, I half joke that I've stayed here as long as I have because of this facility. There are pneumatic air lines in the walls that I could plug into and use like pneumatic spray guns. At any moment. I have a whole lift system behind me. Look, where I could bring in these backdrops. This is extraordinary here. Our deck is big enough to paint. Actually, if you come to Bass Concert Hall and see the fire curtain, the beautiful fire curtain that was designed by Ming Cho Lee and painted by Bob Moody, it was painted right here on this floor. So this is big enough. It's 70 plus feet wide by 35 feet wide floor to do huge backdrops. But the speed, you ask me, how do we do this quickly? We break down the image as efficiently as possible, see if it's faster to paint them on the ground or on the vertical, like on a vertical surface, since we could do it both ways here. And then it's a lot about math and pre-planning, layout, and there is a system to the creation of these paintings. So yes, they are an artistic expression, but they're ultimately can be broken down to step by step by step by step. And that's what I'm trying to teach our students, is how to break down this complicated imagery into a simple way to then be able to put it back together.
And there definitely was a system. I mean, there were some artists who were the specialists at just draftsmen. They would be the ones that would come in and do all the layout. Like Ben Carrera was a master at perspective, and he would come in and draw all the lines. And there were other guys that really did architecture well. There were other guys that did skies. And you always used Harry and Louis to do the sky because they knew how to capture that. Other guys did foliage better, because they're all interesting techniques, and people had their specialties and their secrets, which they would try not to share with other people.
Right. And then I'm going to try to give all their secrets away. That's my job. And also, you'll hear all these words about guys. Women
and it was
for a long time, all the
industry.
guys. And now what's happening in the nation is there are a whole lot of women who are doing this.
Well, that's true in a lot of aspects.
Majority of women.
Design and entertainment. The same thing too in the art department.
I have an ask in here from our lovely Tim Rogers. He asked if we could put up a slide about how to ask questions. So if you are watching this and you have a question for us, please, you go ahead and throw that slide up if you'd like. Just to see how to ask questions. And I'm going to answer another question while we're waiting for that slide, unless it's up now and I just can't see it.
There was a question about someone wondering if these are still filmable today.
Yes, they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
They are. They were just rental assets about it, a couple of years ago. They were going out. And so they do need to get repaired. And also what's happening now with some of these backdrops, they've gone also to Ringling College in Florida. And I know they're writing scripts, their film department's writing scripts around them, and they're filming into them, which is thrilling to me that there'll be a new generation who's understanding what these look like on camera. So I'm also saying out here to the RTF faculty, come on over, bring some cameras. These backdrops are not available for commercial films at all, but they are available for students to be able to see what it's like to shoot into these. And so it's important for just to develop the eyes and also really explicitly how to light these paintings. So when we brought these backdrops onto Bass Concert Hall, initially they were almost all blown out, and because there's so much information in the paintings, you don't need to put a ton of light on it, nor do you have to put a ton of colored light on it, because the painters have already put that color in there for you. Okay, so another question. So yeah, deteriorating film, scale and size. Okay, James Pound asks, he went to the exhibit and was wondering about the dimensions of some of the backdrops. And we saw the inventory on the website and talk about the scale and size. Okay, so the biggest painting we have on stage it was brought up in that pre-film. It's from The Outrage, and it is 30 feet tall and 93 feet wide, and it's a stunning sky. So it's now officially the largest painting owned by the state of Texas, I would say. The last largest painting owned by the state of Texas was our fire curtain, and this is so large, it's hanging actually right upstage of our fire curtain right now, and it's so large we had to fold it back onto itself. So one day we hope to show it on our big cyc track, because it was built as a cyclorama, a surround of a backdrop, but it's designed to create stormy skies over the Sonoran Desert. It's just beautiful. So that's our largest. Our smallest, our tiniest is only about, I thought it was really tiny, and then I tried to hang it up on one of our doors, and I realized as soon as you bring these things vertical, you realize they're a little bigger, but it's like only 9 feet wide by 12 feet tall or something.
That was the BRP. We discovered all sizes.
All sizes and shapes.
It's worth pointing out, when we started to go, and it happened overnight, going into the digital world of image capture from film, there was a big concern. We all had a big concern that the painted backdrop would not stand the scrutiny of the HD world and the definition. Truth is it works just fine. In fact, in some ways it works better, because the cloth and the paint have a natural aerial perspective and depth to them, so they're softer. You're right, you don't have to light them as much. The biggest problem that we have these days is we have a generation of grips and electricians and cameramen that don't know how to light backdrops. Forget painted or photographic. They tend to always overlight them, and that's when we go into big tears, because we see all this beautiful work just being obliterated because they just don't understand the quality and the technique. And that's one of the other BRP spinoffs. We really need to start doing more salons where we bring the back. We wanted to do this a while back, and it fell by the way with all the other things going on, but an actual salon in a stage with different backdrops, so that they really can explore the techniques and learn how to light these things, and actually learn how to light photographic backdrops as well, because they each have their own techniques, and different types of light work better. But the fabric has survived. When I first became president, we merged, actually in the first year, we merged with the Scenic Artists Guild. And that was the guild that had been around for a long time. That was the first union I belonged to. And I knew a lot of these artists from their work, having trained on some of them many years back. But it was a sad time, because that was the point when computers were really taking over in our workplace, and they have.
Yeah, you're jumping into a really good segue. I'm going to jump in because we're heading towards 2:00. But about that, and we have a question specifically about, I hear where you're going, about this kind of technology,
Right.
like understanding what is the value, Harold asks, of, oh, not Harold, somebody else asks, about teaching this kind of painting if everything's shifting digital anyway. And I really want to speak to that.
Yeah, it's very important.
It's very important. I'm deeply committed to digital analog fluidity for our students, to be able to see clearly. If you don't have eyes to see this well and correctly, the images you're creating for the story you're trying to say, it will never be executed well, whatever technique you're using. So it's know that the digital technology is another tool, but this knowledge is critical for making that tool effective. And so I know we're super close to the end. One more thing.
But it is important to stress that you need to learn the analog skills to be able to excel at the digital skills. There's a lot of people that just start growing up, they're closet rats working with their mouses in the dark and, enjoying making things. But the knowledge that you gain through that tactile analog experience of translating an image into, whether you're working in paint, pencil, whatever, to be a designer, to be a painter, it's just critical education, just fundamental education. Because then when you get the other tools, they are just tools, but you have that sensibility. You understand what depth and perspective and the interaction of color is. And so, I have a tear when I see your students learning from these things and practicing that, because it's the step one that they need to really excel as artists through the life of their rich careers, is to start with this material and then explore and take off.
Absolutely.
So I think you guys have created a home for it. We'll have to talk about the BRP another time.
We'll talk about,
but you should read the book because there's a lot of good stories in there, if you can find it. And I'm sure there's at your library.
They're at our library, and I have some copies too for sale as well. And I wanted to just share that the backdrop the exhibition behind the scenes, the Art of the Hollywood backdrop, actually has been so successful that we're extending our run. And so if you're interested in seeing this exhibition, we will have a virtual tour available, hopefully as soon as next week if you can't get yourself to Austin. Or if you can get here, tickets are available at texasperformingarts.org. We have extended the exhibition through April 18th. It is free for all UT students, all UT staff and faculty, as well as I believe first responders are receiving, maybe not first responders, sorry, our critical workforce who is still working in the medical.
That was the BRP or the first responders.
Oh my gosh, the BRP was the first responders, but our essential workers, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you so much for being here. And so April 18th is our last day of this exhibition. Find out more at texasperformingarts.org. And I hope I see you someday here in my classes, and hopefully we'll see you at Texas. I feel like I have to hook them, but I'm going to hook them.
Well, that was just incredible. And I want to thank everybody from around the world for being here as a part of Explore UT. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Karen, for sharing your incredible stories and wisdom. And when we reflect back on having to do this virtually, there is absolutely no substitute for having everybody here in person. On the other hand, as opposed to being in a big auditorium online, no one's in the back row. And you got to admit, coming to Austin, you couldn't wear your slippers like a lot of you are probably wearing your slippers right now, enjoying this. So there are some benefits. In particular, one good thing is that you can come back to the website and see recordings of the programs and share them with friends, including this one. And we want you to stay in touch. And hopefully many of you will be able to join us on campus next year for Explore UT 2022. And I'd like to finish by just saying, above all else, I hope that everybody watching out there, that someday you can imagine yourself being a student at UT Austin. We learn, we explore. Come learn and explore with us, and come see what's next.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, and I hope to see you here soon.
Bye.